Today's topic is from our Math 8 Foundations videos, where we are going to compare and order rational numbers. Our focus standard is from grade 8 number sense. Know that numbers that are not rational are called irrational. Our comparing and ordering rational numbers today is going to help us as we advance through the year and work towards this 8th grade standard here. Our essential question today is, what are rational numbers and how do we compare and order them? So please take a moment, pausing the video if you need to set up your header. Be sure to include today's date, then set up your question column and your note column, and resume the video when you're ready to begin. I want to start today's video off by talking about some vocabulary. First of all, we see rational numbers here in our essential question, so before we can really understand them, we need to know what they are. Rational numbers are numbers that can be written as the division of two integers. In other words, rational numbers are values that can be written as a fraction. Within this definition of rational numbers, we talk about integers, so I want to be sure to clear that up and make sure that we all realize that integers are all whole numbers. So today, we're going to be comparing and ordering numbers that can be written as a fraction, which is really the division of two integers. Before we begin comparing and ordering, we want to make sure we review our comparison symbols. These symbols in the table here should make sense, or should be familiar, rather. Take a moment to see if you can remember what the names of each of these symbols are. So again, and I will give you these reminders throughout these video lessons, please pause if you need to and make sure that this is all copied into your notes, and then resume the video when you're ready to continue and you are caught up with your notes. So when comparing and ordering problems with basic values and rational numbers, we basically have two types of problems. The first type of problems are when all the numbers or values are in the same form, and the second type of problem is when they are in different forms. So if we get them all in the same form, say they're all fractions, or they're all decimals, or they're all whole numbers, we can just compare them and order them as they are. But when we get problems that are in different forms, we have to do a little more work. First, we'll want to convert them to be in the same form, and then we'll compare and order them. And it's important to remember that if you've had to do some conversion to be able to compare and order them, that when you give your answers, you want to give your answer in the original form that each of the numbers were in. So, two different types of problems, and we're going to look at those now. Here's our first problem. We're being asked to compare and order the following values from least to greatest. So we have 1 and 126 thousandths, 1 and 56 thousandths, 1 and 125 thousandths, and lastly 1 and 143 thousandths. So we want to be able to place them in order from least to greatest. I've included a number line here for us, just as an indicator and a reminder that a number line, although one of the simplest and first tools we ever learned to use, it will continue to come in handy, and don't be afraid to use a number line to help you organize your thoughts. So some of you might be able to start seeing these right away and start putting them approximately where they would belong on this number line, and some of us may not. So if you're feeling a little bit lost, one thing I like to do is rewrite them so that they're stacked on top of each other. And what this allows me to do is to compare them by place value. So one of the things we notice is all the numbers have a 1 in the ones column. So we know that all of them are greater than 1. So the ones place doesn't really help us. If we look at the next place value, the tenths place, we see a 1, 1, 1, 0. Well, 0 is less than 1, so this means that this must be our lowest number. And it's just going to go approximately right here. I'm not going to try and be perfect, but it's somewhere between 1 and 1.1 and somewhere approximately close to the middle. So it leaves us with 3 more numbers to work with. We know that they all have ones in the tenths place, so we need to go to the next place value, which is the hundredths. So I'd see 2, 2, and 4. So these are our next 2 lowest, but again, they're tied. So we have to go 1 more place value to the thousandths place. This number here has a 5 in the thousandths place value, where this number has a 6. So 5 is less than 6. So this is our next one. It's greater than 1.1. It's probably somewhere about here. This number was extremely close. It was just a little bit bigger, so it would be next. And 1 and 143 thousandths was our greatest number. So these are not exactly where they should be on our number line, but they're in order now from least to greatest. So we could say this is the order that we would expect to see them. We just wanted to move them down here closer to each other because we were never asked to put them on the number line. This would be our final answer. Here are the values in order from least to greatest. So this was an example of this first type of problem. They were all in the same form, so we could just start to compare and order them as they were, and now we can give our final answer and move on to the next problem. Here we're being asked to compare the 2 values. So when you're being asked to compare, you're sometimes given a circle or something here to put we're looking for one of these comparison symbols. So what symbol would we use between these 2 values, 1 and 136 thousandths, compared to 1 and 135 thousandths? And again, we use a similar method as we just did before. We go place value by place value until we find a digit that is different. In the ones, tenths, and hundredths place, they all have the same values. So it isn't until we get to the thousandths place value that we see that there's a difference. The 6 is greater than the 5, so that means that this whole number is greater than this one. So if you thought to put a greater than symbol there, you are correct. So the third problem is order the values from least to greatest. So again, we're given a set of values. We're being asked to compare them. We want to put them in order from least to greatest. But now we're talking about the second type of problem. I see a whole number, I see a decimal, I see a couple of fractions. I also see some positive values and some negative values. So we have to keep all that in mind as we attempt to do this. So we really have 2 different options. Our first option is that we can convert them all to decimals. And our second option is that we can convert them all to fractions, because those would be the 2 main forms that we're dealing with. So what I've done here is just copied them down, but let's go ahead and try it out with this first option. Let's convert all of them to decimals and see how we do. So -2 would just become -2.00. I'm going 2 place values past the decimal because that is what the form that this decimal is in. 1/4. Think about that. What would that be as a decimal? If you said 0 and 25 hundredths, I would agree with you. And let's think about -3 halves. If you thought -1.5 or 1.50 to keep it in the same form, again, I would agree. So here we took each of these 4 values and we've converted them all to decimals, and the reason why we did that is in order to compare them and make sure that we're putting them in order. It's helpful to have them all in the same form. So here we converted them all to decimals. This would then begin to look a lot like our very first problem. And we'd say, okay, which one is the least? Well, -2 is definitely lower than -1.5 or -1 50 hundredths. So these 2 would be the 2 lowest because they're negative values. And next would be 0 and 25 hundredths. And lastly would be 0 and 75 hundredths. That'd be our greatest. So we just do a double check. Well, this is the most negative, so it's the lowest, and the next, and next, and next. For our second option, again, we're looking at these same 4 values. If you feel more comfortable with fractions, you could have decided to convert all these values to fractions. Negative 2 as a fraction would be just negative 2 over 1. 0 and 75 hundredths would be 3/4. 1/4 is already in a fraction, and negative 3/2 is already in a fraction. So here we've converted them all to fractions, but this one has a little bit more work to do here. So again, it's a little bit easier because we've already done some work over here, but if we were assuming this was the first way that we looked at it, when comparing and ordering fractions, you have to make sure that your denominators are all the same, so you have to do a little extra work. So in order to make our denominator here a 4, we'd have to multiply the numerator by 4, which would be -8, and the denominator by 4, so it'd be -8/4. In order to make this 2, in our denominator 4, we'd have to multiply it by 2, which means we have to multiply the 3, so it'd be -6, and this would be and this would be 4. So now we've converted them all to fractions, and we've made sure that they all have the same denominator. We've done the work to make equivalent fractions. Now we can do the same thing. -8/4 is the lowest, then -6/4, then 1/4, and then of course 3/4 is the greatest. So here we've converted them all to fractions with equivalent denominators. We'd have to put them in order. Remember what I said about these types of problems though? If you are looking at problems where the values are in different forms and you convert them all to the same form, you still have to give your final answer with the values in the original form. So -2 is our lowest, then -3/2, that was one that was equal to -1.5, then was 1/4, and lastly was 0 and 75 hundredths. So in order from least to greatest, this here would be our final answer. So that's going to go ahead and conclude our video for today, talking about comparing and ordering rational numbers. So what I'd like you to do is just take a moment, make sure that your notes are complete with a header, that you have all of this information copied down. If you miss something or aren't quite sure, you may want to go back through, double check. Be sure to make a summary section at the end of your notes. It's okay if that has to go on to the next page. And come ready to class to discuss and work with these types of problems more.